This is the Fix Your Sciatica podcast.
So every now and then, I like to take a step away from the world of sciatica and look at various other conditions that can often be found when dealing with pain. And today we're going to be talking specifically about headaches. What is that ache in your head? What's causing it? How can we figure out the cause and what do we do about it? And there's certainly a world in headache management for physical therapy. I've interviewed a physical therapist a couple of months ago about it. But what about from a chiropractic standpoint? And today I have Dr. Vrzal, Dr. V, who was kind enough to share his expertise, and he actually has a book all about headache management, and we're going to take a deep dive into this. So Dr. V, it's so great seeing you. Thank you for being a guest on today's podcast.
Ashley, thanks for having me. And it's a great subject. Almost half the population suffers with headaches, and so that's needlessly suffers with headaches. And realistically, there are natural solutions, ways that we can, as consumers, as humans pursuing health, things that we can do, adjust in our lifestyle to get rid of or eradicate those headaches without having to do, mask it with drugs or surgery or that stuff.
And so before we go into the world of headaches, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background. How did you get to the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, like so many in the industry, I had headaches. It ultimately started for me when I passed out at a MGM Grand. We were at a big event, seeing the lion and hundreds of people around. I dropped, and it turned out I was hypoglycemic, got diagnosed that way, and quit eating refined sugar at 14. And that really started my whole pursuit of health. When I recognized how lousy I felt and how poorly I performed when I ate sugar, I swore it off, literally at that moment. And then as I got it, I became a natural bodybuilder. And as I was working out, I started getting these gnarly headaches, and they would be a whole head pounding headache. Went through the medical model. They didn't have much to offer. Went through the CAT scan, and they said, well, you don't have an aneurysm, so go see a psychiatrist. And so that didn't bode well, and that wasn't really a solution. So ultimately, I ended up in chiropractic school because it had the nutritional aspect to it that I'd already been pursuing with my weight training and dietary aspirations. So as soon as I got into healthcare, I took a position on college to basically interview and bring docs in all the premier techniques to come to the college and talk about what they did and share to the students. I realized that this approach called applied kinesiology had the tools to identify virtually anything that would walk in the door. And as a physical therapist, you might kind of have enjoy the fact of every muscle has associated glands or organs with it. And so when we have these areas of weakness, and if the neck extensors aren't firing properly, ultimately I've identify that with enzymes in the thyroid and its function there. And so then that would set up, weakness in the neck and these chronic problems. There can be emotional triggers with it as well. And so we use this muscle organ correlation to identify where the problems are. Then we look at structural needs, dietary needs, supplemental needs, or emotional triggers, and then help the person identify what that might be. And so using that approach, I was able to identify, every time somebody come in with a headache, again, because I had headaches that got me into healthcare, I whittled it down ultimately to the 7 patterns of headaches, or 7 patterns of head pain. And so the reason I call the book The Headache Advantage is because ultimately for me as a clinician, the location of that headache, the location of that head pain really is ultimately tends to be the priority in that person's healthcare journey. And so they may have, a whole list of seemingly unrelated symptoms, but whatever the location of the headache is, that tells me, hey, if we fix the gallbladder, if we fix the stomach or the thyroid, pituitary, that's more than likely going to take care of the lion's share of their signs and symptoms and their, dysfunction in life.
So let's talk about this medical continuum.
Okay.
You have a grand scheme of medical professionals. You have the physicians on one end, and then which provides really like the medical side, the pharmaceuticals, any sort of like the deep, intense interventions. And then we transition into the the therapeutic professionals, the chiropractors, the physical therapists, acupuncture, massage therapists, we have this continuous spectrum. Now, you've gone through the entire spectrum dealing with your headaches, and you realize that it was really more so not, although you were medically cleared, right, and you got referred to the psychiatry or psychology, there was still something underlying that was actually a result of it, right? And so this brings me to my next question about the various different types of headaches that are out there. Now, you said that there's 7 patterns, right?
Yes.
But it would it would be important for us to also delineate that there is going to be a difference between the headaches that are created by some sort of like medical issue, like high blood pressure or some sort of brain injury or something like that, to addressing the other imbalances that we have in our body. So tell us a little bit more about that spectrum. We'll start with like the most involved to the less involved, or the areas of which the work that you do is able to help.
Yeah. And so ultimately, the headache patterns tend to be referred pain and correlating with acupuncture meridians, and based on the location, the direction, the pattern of those meridians. But to tie that in with, the medical continuum, as you're referring to, a good example of this is a gal that I was treating that had been diagnosed with trigeminal neuralgia, and and she'd had a blow to the head. She actually had, basically a plate in her head, and so they blamed it on the fact that was compromising. It had affected that trigeminal nerve that's all around the left side of the head, and so in her case, it was a stomach issue, and ultimately helping her stomach function better, in other words, raising her ability to produce stomach acid, has eradicated that. She'd had 17 years of head pain on the left side. She had complete medical justification for, but I mean, the beauty was healing her stomach took care of it. So just to kind of flip things on over, really the continuum, surgery and medications ultimately should be alternative care. It should be, hey, changing my lifestyle, modifying my diet or taking a vitamin didn't quite get us there. Now maybe we should look at these other options. So just to kind of, be a little contentious maybe, or flip things over. Really, it should always start with, is there something I'm eating? Maybe I always recommend journaling. It's an easy thing to do, costs nothing. If it's a great way to figure out potentially what's going on, what the triggers might be for the headaches. So like I said, this gal had a left-sided headache that we ultimately had to get her on some supplements to help her make stomach acid better. Vitamin B1, thiamine is a big nutrient to help make stomach acid. Calcium helps buffer and help the stomach. It also helps make stomach acid. Zinc also helps make stomach acid. So those are nutrients we might want to consider if a person also has hormonal problems, or food doesn't taste well, or their sense of smell doesn't work well. Those are signs that they might need zinc. That's an easy fix. Most people are zinc deficient. That got a lot of press, during the COVID years, right? That viruses also leach zinc, sugar leaches zinc, stress leaches zinc. So, it's real easy and our foods often are deficient in zinc. So it's probably the most common mineral deficiency I see. And that's an easy thing to take a good zinc supplement, eat your organic vegetables, to build the zinc up, to make stomach acid, to feed hormones. That should be our first line of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so briefly, one, I'm going to double emphasize the importance of pain journaling. And this is going to be not just for headaches, but this is for sciatica. This is for people who are dealing with any sort of pain that they're like, I'm trying to figure this out, but I don't. Totally. And I've interacted with a lot of my clients who, when we're going through their pain journey, whether it be headaches, sciatica, any issue at all, when I'm asking someone, tell me about how this pain came about, they'll often say, well, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden I have pain and I've gone through multiple practitioners and I've had no improvement. And it's literally that 15-second statement. And the reality is the fact that us as practitioners, we can't really make much sense from that specific statement. We just know that a whole bunch of stuff failed, but we don't know what failed and we don't know what the triggers are. And I can tell when I ask for people to elaborate a little bit more about their journey, I notice two things. Number one, I can sense a little bit of maybe irritation and frustration. I think usually when that happens, it's because they've been telling people over and over again that they're having a lot of this pain, yet nothing is helping. And I totally understand that. I totally get the frustration. The second reaction is the fact that, well, no one's ever asked me before about how my pain has been behaving. And what we need as practitioners is to identify what those patterns are that can help us identify what the solution is. And we can't identify patterns if we can't get the necessary information. We can't understand what the behavior of the pain is. And so the journal is particularly helpful because you can say, all right, right now I'm in a 7 out of 10 pain. My pain distribution is in this part of my head, or my pain distribution is in this part of my leg. Okay, well, that's the current snapshot. But then we also have to look backwards and say, all right, well, if we know that our symptoms are experiencing this right now, what were the events that led up to me feeling this way? And I forgot who I learned this from, but I found that a 2-hour window, leading up to the specific instance that you're recording your pain is a good enough time window for us to determine what happened or what are some of those triggers. And so listeners, if there's a lesson, even just from the first 10 to 15 minutes of us talking right now, is to keep a pain journal so we can truly identify what the pattern is. And it's not your job to identify the pattern. It's our job as the healthcare providers, physical therapists, chiropractors, the physicians. It's our job is to determine the pattern. That's why you're coming to us. So you don't have to necessarily know the pattern, but we have to present this information to people like Dr. V, to myself, and to other physicians so that we can get a better understanding of what's going on and so we can do our job. And so in regards to the pain journal, Dr. V, tell us a little bit more about the patterns that you're looking for. I think you said that there are 7.
7 patterns of headaches. Just to double back on what you're saying, right along with, when the patient, when we're leading up to a journal, I mean, when a person says, well, it comes and goes, that's a big hallelujah. That gives us an opportunity. Hey, it ebbed. What did I do different? What did I eat different? I mean, my personal example, in the early days of my dietary modifications, I was looking at the blood type diet and some things like that. I'd wake up feeling like an old man. I'd have that acute L5, that central low back pain. And as I paid attention, journaled, if you will, to what I was eating and doing, it was corn. Every time I'd eat corn, or if in those days, 20 some odd years ago, I'd splurge and eat pizza, I could tell if they had corn in the crust of the pizza by the way my L5, my low back felt when I got up in the morning. So it's like, there's the answer, right? And so I don't touch corn because it makes me feel achy and inflamed and old, if you will. And so when a symptom ebbs and flows, then that gives us an inroad into, journal, my sciatica was gnarly, or my left-sided headache was gnarly today. What did I do last night? Did I, ate a bunch of fried food, or, I did something like that, or, in the PT world, I was, shoveling snow, or, moving sandbags, or that sort of stuff. Look for the triggers, and even the physical aches and pain, issues of shoveling snow or moving sandbags, there's an inherent weakness that set that problem up. We should be able to do that stuff. I mean, we should be able to ride our bikes and, weight train and shovel snow without aches and pains. We want to get to the underlying weakness. So yeah, that's where the clinician comes in, potentially understanding these patterns and how they react. As the health pursuer, listeners, you want to pay attention to what's different, in journal, as you mentioned, what we're doing. Those patterns then, again, for headaches, the right-sided headache is a gallbladder concern. So when the gallbladder is not functioning properly, be it because there's too many nuts and seeds and not enough omega-3s, or too much glyphosate, too many pesticides in the diet, that's going to compromise the gallbladder and set up a right-sided headache. Because the gallbladder meridian starts right beside the eye, it kind of does a ram horn, if you will, down the side of the head. The second most common headache is a left-sided headache. That's a stomach concern. I talked about the gal that was told that she had trigeminal neuralgia, and it was actually a stomach concern in her case, even though she had surgery and a blunt trauma to the left side of the head. So even a left-sided sinus or left eye, a lot of times the first place to start is looking at stomach function and getting stomach acid optimized. So that's a left-sided head. And the typical pattern of holding the front of the head, the frontal headache, that is the poor handling of poor management of stress, ultimately compromising the stomach lining. Think ulcer. So chronic stress suppresses stomach acid. The stomach starts to, the stomach lining gets compromised. That's going to be the frontal headache, the penultimate stress type headache, if you will. Then the back of the head, what's typically referred to as a tension headache, that is a thyroid problem. That's typically an underfunctioning thyroid. So ultimately the thyroid activates enzymes in its production and stimulation of metabolism. So when those enzymes don't activate properly, then the neck extensors don't fire optimally, and then that can set up a tension headache. Ultimately, for this audience, there's a physical pattern where the scalenes turn off and the neck jams, and then that turns off or conditionally inhibits the glute max muscles, both gluteal max muscles, and that weakness sets up chronic tension and ultimately can lead to an L5 disc problem. Ultimately, most of the time, that's an autoimmune attack on the thyroid that sets up that L5 disc and that low back, potentially leading to disc and sciatica. That could be, our next episode. But that's in there. That's a tension headache. And then we've got the kind of the least common of the headaches is the pituitary, what I call a cyclops headache, the third eye pattern. That's from the pituitary swelling. Pituitary regulates hormones and growth hormone, that sort of thing. So that's another headache. And then the girls, the bitemporal, kind of like where my headphones are, When it's on both sides, that's an estrogen metabolism concern. So that's your hormonal headaches that ladies are going to typically have, once or twice a month. And then the headaches I was having was a whole head headache, or like a headband. That typically occurs when the colon is not functioning properly. And so that will cause that tension, or feel like a hat is on real tight. So then we need to get the colon optimizer functioning optimally. So that's how things physically fit in. We can get into all the muscle and the physical patterns of each of these organ systems as we go.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing those specific patterns. And this all goes back on the importance of the use of a pain journal, or to be as descriptive as your pain as possible. Because let's go into the world of sciatica, for example. What's really interesting is that the sciatic nerve is one of the longest nerves in our body, right? And it extends from our brain, it travels down our spinal cord, and it goes down our leg. And I think oftentimes what ends up being very, very challenging is the fact that people are like, I think I have sciatica pain. And then it's, okay, well, tell us a little bit more about the distribution of your pain, because sciatica pain can present itself in back pain, thigh pain, calf pain. But also what's really interesting, and you probably have come across this, like the glutes themselves are supplied by the gluteal nerves, both superior and inferior gluteal nerves. They're not the sciatic nerve, although they come from the back and they come from similar nerve roots from the sciatic nerve. For someone to say that's the sciatic nerve itself, it's a misnomer, right? But then also what's particularly interesting is that when people are experiencing pain on the anterior thigh or the groin, yes, they share some similar nerve roots from the sciatic nerve themselves, but they are a different set of nerves. And especially what I found to be really, really interesting is when people experience medial calf pain. Medial calf pain is really more so an extension of the saphenous nerve, which again does share some nerve roots with the sciatic nerve itself. But again, what this is all saying is that it is important for you to be able to describe your pain and its behavior, because just like Dr. V described, if you're having, say, like a right-sided headache, it's likely related to the gallbladder, right? And so being very clear on describing the pain that you're going through is going to make our jobs a lot easier, because from there, once as practitioners, we are able to determine a specific pattern, this is where we can actually start into talking about specific management. And the reality is the fact that, and Dr. V will correct me and we'll talk a little bit more, but each specific one of these patterns will also require a different mode of intervention or a different tool, because and this is where I find it to be really, really challenging in the world of sciatica pain, is because if you Google the best stretches for sciatica, one of the first common stretches you're going to see is going to be the cat-cow stretch. And the reality of the cat-cow stretch, there's going to be some people who are going to do really well with the cat stretch, which is going to be more of the rounding. And there are going to be some other people who are going to tolerate really well from the arching or the cow position. And the reality is that there's going to be one of those positions that actually is helpful.
This episode is brought to you by the Patient Advocate Program. Are you tired of not having support between your rehab sessions? Introducing the Patient Advocate Program, and we're focused on your recovery, and we're offering you 24/7 access to a doctorate of physical therapy. Stop waiting in line to be seen and stop spending hours doing long exercise programs. Imagine being able to get all of your care delivered straight to your phone. Best of all, it's affordable. We believe everyone deserves top-notch relief without breaking the bank. So why wait? Take control of your health today and visit ptpatientadvocate.com and book your free call with our experts.
But again, it's going to be based on the pattern, because every pattern is going to have a specific set of tools that it's going to be benefiting from, especially in this case, we'll talk about headaches. So when it comes to management itself, right? Well, actually, before we talk about management, right now, we have these, gallbladder, stomach stress, thyroid, pituitary gland metabolism, and then we also have the colon itself. There are some cases where headaches could be more of like a medical emergency. Right now, this show is not designed to diagnose or treat any medical conditions, to be clear, right? Would you say that there are scenarios in which headaches could be a little bit more indicative of something that wouldn't necessarily be related to these specific patterns that you were talking about?
Yeah, and again, as to lean into what you said, ultimately we're here to empower others, to empower people to make healthy changes, which is ultimately going to help them feel, function, thrive, ultimately where they want to be. Yes, I mean, the crazy thing is, as crazy as it is, I've seen brain tumors even. I mean, that's obviously what most people are going to be like, maybe it's something gnarly, and brain tumor or an aneurysm or that sort of stuff. Even something as crazy as a tumor, I've seen shrink from doing these, correcting gallbladder function for a right-sided headache, for example. And we have MRI proof of that. Again, we're not here to give medical, diagnose. We're here to help you learn, as a listener, help you learn from what your pain might be telling you. Get the big scary stuff ruled out. There's a time and place for that type of pursuit as well. But do everything you can, learn from modalities like this. Get the information to try to learn from what your body's telling you. Pain is an indicator. My favorite line, on venues like this is, pain is intended to elicit change. Pain is intended to elicit change. The pain is there to stop us from doing exercise X, or stop us from eating, food Y. So learn from what your body's trying to tell you, as Ashley's, so eloquently alluding to. Every pattern, every little nuance in where that pain is tells a different story. Just to kind of lean into what you're talking about with the different nerves and so on. Piriformis syndrome. We'll talk about this probably on a follow-up, but piriformis syndrome in my world is a hormone issue. That's typically estrogen causing yeast overgrowth, and then that piriformis spasms, the sciatic nerve goes either over, under, or right directly through the piriformis muscle. So when that muscle's not happy, that can set up that whole sciatic nerve. Piriformis muscle, we're talking about estrogen metabolism. So ladies, that's going to be your bitemporal headache. So that's how these things all kind of fit together, and we can, when you as a sufferer, for example, have this, the more information we get to how these patterns fit or what else you have going on in your life, the better we can lean into, the more succinct and more exacting we can be as clinicians to help you thrive, right?
100%. Which brings me up to my next question in regards to this is a whole discussion in itself, but let's talk about the causes of these dysfunctions. I know from a physical therapy standpoint, especially when I'm working with someone in their 30s and 40s, and oftentimes outside of trauma, a lot of the pain that they're dealing with is actually how they have been doing things over a span of years. So we'll talk about movement habits and behaviors. And so oftentimes what I would say is, listen, we have to take some time to change this up. And it could have been years and years and years in the making, that whatever incident that actually elicited the pain was really more so the last straw that broke the camel's back. And so if we're looking at the various different patterns that you see in headaches, is it more of a gradual onset that all of a sudden it was, again, the tipping point? Or could it be more of an acute type of scenario in which these things do come out of balance?
Right. Typically, I'm mostly dealing with chronic illness, in this case, and we get to surpass threshold, if you will, the final straw that broke the camel's back, right? The Headache Advantage in my book, the first couple chapters are talking about things like artificial sweeteners or MSG or sugar that are typical triggers, or dehydration, typical triggers that are going to make us more vulnerable. Sugar is going to make everything worse ultimately. So, if you get one petty thing, so to speak, from this podcast, reduce your sugar, your refined sugar consumption. It's gonna leach B vitamins. It's gonna create ladies to be more estrogen dominant. For men, it's going to cause our testosterone to convert to estrogen, which makes us more, cry at chick flicks and get man boobs and so on. So sugar is going to make everything worse. So yeah, there's certainly things like that are going to make us more susceptible to problems. Emotions are another part of the trigger, and that's why, somebody that's been sick for 20 years, and then they've, every time some stressor happens, they get stuffed away in the body. Incidentally, the way that we can reduce the manifestation of that is to be loaded up on minerals, which means organic vegetables. Organic vegetables have more minerals. Minerals are going to help us be more resilient against the emotional stress. Think the chill kind of lifestyle. That's a person that has good saturation of minerals. They're going to be less prone to stuffing away every emotion that comes down the pike, or every stressor. The person that's eating sugar, that's not eating organic vegetables to have all those minerals, they're going to be more prone to store away every time, physically store the manifestation of those emotions every time something happens. So those are the little nuances that are going to make a person more susceptible to the problems when they do happen, and have a lower threshold to stress, to problems. So we want to do what we can, exercise, eat our organic vegetables, eat good fats, fish, raw nuts, olive oil, that sort of stuff. Those are all going to help us be more resilient, so that proverbial final straw is much higher up the peak before we jump off.
I like to think the accumulation of a lot of these stresses, or even just the chemicals that we come across throughout our daily lives, I like to think about it, this concept of capacity. And so we all start off with a specific cup. And every single stress that you add to your body is going to be filling up that cup. Now, cups do have a finite amount of volume that it can handle before it starts to overflow. And you can let me know if you agree with me. In regards to like resiliency and capacity, what I found, interestingly enough, is that when you reach that tipping point of that cup being overflowing, most of the time people think, well, let's just go ahead and stop filling that cup up. But what people often forget is that when that cup starts to overflow, not only are you starting to feel the pain, but that cup actually starts to shrink. That cup starts to shrink, which means that your capacity to handle these stresses, these chemicals, actually start to decrease over time. And so not only do we need to be able to put less and less in that cup to make sure it doesn't overflow, we need to be able to do whatever we need to do to increase that capacity again, right? And it's through working with someone like you, the strategies that you discuss in your book, but then it's also being able to focus on how we go about doing things and how we actually manage those stresses or those environmental actions as well. So with that being the case, right, it definitely seems, I'm glad that you brought up this concept of nutrition, because there's definitely a lot of dysfunctions that are tied with the things that we put in our bodies, or even just the overall environmental triggers behind it, right? And so tell us a little bit more about the typical, or like how one should actually evaluate themselves. Like we have the pain journal, right? But then how can one effectively communicate that information to a person like yourself or to a medical provider to get the most amount of effect in their visits, right? For the most part, when they go to a physician, maybe a 20-minute visit. When they work with me, it's about a 1-hour visit. For you, maybe it's a 1-hour visit as well. So how do we maximize that time? Because I think, unfortunately, when we're products in the medical system and we're going from provider to provider, we're often saying the same thing over and over again. And again, we're trying to say the same thing over and over again from a different lens in a very short period of time, which then gets me thinking, how can we really maximize that time when we're with a provider? How can we actually improve our communication or ability to share that with the other end, the person who's trying to help us?
Right. So two things. Yeah. Backing up a little bit on the overflow thing. I mean, I'm an exercise junkie, competitive athlete all of my adult life. And so it's all about training to threshold, right? And so when do we implement the higher intensity days? That's that stress full bucket thing you were talking about, right? If my life if my bucket's full with all the stress of life, that's not the time to go do high intensity intervals training, right? Because that's going to jump me off the ledge. Whereas when life is pretty good, then I can do more intensity and I can balance that. So that exercise, that balance, that modulation in life is going to help us have more volume in the bucket to be able to tolerate life and stress. So again, exercise is a great example of your full bucket scenario where the volume my body, my brain can tolerate is different depending on what's going on in my life. When life is gnarly and chaotic, I'm going to do a low intensity, long duration type of exercise so that I don't jump off the edge of the cliff, if you will. The thing symptomatically leaning into the journal thing, how do we feel first thing in the morning? When we're stressed and overworked and overtrained, our resting heart rate's going to be up 10 to 10 beats a minute potentially before we even get out of bed, meaning that our body's still in recovery. Our energy, our cortisol is going to be lower. Chronic stress leads to lower cortisol. So we're not going to have that zeal, that we're not going to jump and spring out of bed when we're at threshold, when our bucket is full. So that's a good indication, a good thing to also add to your journal as you're considering, how did you feel first thing in the morning? Did you wake up after a great night's sleep ready to, with your boxing gloves on, ready to take on the world? Or did you barely crawl out of bed and hit snooze 5 times? That's a sign that you're beat down. It's not the time to overtrain. It's not the time to take on a new task or go party all night. You don't have the reserves at that point. Your bucket's already full. So that's another thing to add to your list, so that when you do come in, to your provider, having that list with, sciatica was worse, or I had my headache. The location of the headache was on this side of my head today. Those are all little indicators that can, for me as a clinician, when I hear a few of those and they all have a similar, in my world, organ correlation, it's like, boom, pounce, lion after its prey. It's like, I know what the trigger is. Here we go. Let's prove it out. Let's see what you need to do to change so that this doesn't keep recurring in your life.
So this brings up the next question in regards to the associated symptoms and referred pain, because you brought that up, and especially when it comes to the 7 headache patterns. And This is something that we learned in physical therapy school. Physical therapists were not trained to diagnose associated symptoms. That's actually when we refer out. But it is important for us as physical therapists and movement specialists to be able to identify, is what is happening related to more of a movement and biomechanics issue, or is it something more internal, more from a physiological standpoint? And so as physical therapists, the majority of the states in the US are actually trained and allowed to do what is called direct access. That means that we can see you without actually having you need to go to a physician who would have a deeper inspection to ensure that there are no clinical red flags or any sort of things that are really outside the control or ability of a physical therapist. But when it comes to associated symptoms, I remember one of the main questions I would often ask in evaluations is, are there any other things that are happening in your body that you think could be related to this? And I find what's really interesting, especially when it comes to that question, a lot of times people think, all right, well, if I'm having a headache, all right, I'm not going to think about, or I'm not going to associate my issues with bowel movements with the headaches I've been dealing with, right? And so how do you, for the audience, what's a word of advice in regards to, okay, you're experiencing this, but like look at your entire body, see what else you're going through, and see if there's any sort of connection. How can we phrase that a little bit better or more actionable for them?
Yeah, great question. And that's the other impetus, the other driver behind the book is unfortunately, nobody else is talking, fortunately or unfortunately, really, fortunately for me, I guess, in promotional perspective, but nobody else is talking about headaches in these 7 patterns and the location. Everybody talks about migraines. Migraine basically just means you lose work, or it's ominous enough to prevent you from functioning in your daily tasks, your daily activities. So look at the location. In my book, there's questionnaires of, 10 to 20 questions of areas that or other symptoms that are going to be related to the stomach, to the gallbladder, to the thyroid, to help you as a pursuer of health, help you understand what all the other triggers might be or how, the same organ's going to manifest elsewhere in the body. So, putting that together is going to be very helpful. And with PT, you guys have the hands-on and the better relationship, the connection with the patient to help them find these things, right? That, as you alluded to earlier, the typical office visit in the medical arena is minutes, 6 minutes maybe. And it's like, oh, you have a headache. Here's your Advil, your Tylenol. Here's a prescription for this pain medication. As pursuers of health, unfortunately, have to be the inspectors, the researchers to figure out what we're doing in our lives, because it can be time consuming outside of, some of the protocols that, the kinesiology and things that I use or functional medicine to identify, but it takes research and it can be done 100%. It doesn't have to be an ominous, all-inclusive, all-encompassing thing. Just pay attention to what your body's trying to tell you.
So here we have these various different patterns of headaches. Again, they could be indicative of some sort of dysfunction or imbalance in various different organs and presenting itself as referred pain or referred symptoms. We also talked about the importance of being able to keep track of your pain through a pain journal, which is going to be specifically important, especially when you're dealing with pain for a long period of time. It's really easy for us to get really caught up in the moment to say, I have pain and I don't, and I wish I can just turn this pain off. And listeners, reality is that Dr. V, myself, we wish we had the power to help you just turn the pain off and on, or turn the pain from on to off, just like a light switch. But if you've been dealing with this pain for a long period of time, it could be a very simple fix, as in stop bending over and rounding your back. But it could also be I guess I would call it maybe a little bit more complicated, but a different approach where it could be, all right, well, maybe your digestion or you're having some sort of dysfunction physiologically. And ultimately, you can kind of determine that on your own through some guesswork, but you can also streamline that, working with providers like Dr. V and being able to get assessed and be able to say, are these is my pain consistent with the patterns that Dr. V has talked about in today's episode or in his books? And then from there, being able to experiment. And the reality is that when it comes to managing pain or any other medical issue, we're approaching it as scientists. We go and we get this information, we identify a pattern, and we have a suspicion. right? From that suspicion, we will provide an intervention. That intervention is not only going to be an intervention, but it's also going to be an assessment as well, because we provide that intervention, whether it be Dr. V's suggestion of changing up what you're putting in your body, or for myself, changing up how you move, and it improves your pain. Fantastic. We are going on the right track that allows us to make the next move, an informed next move. But if the intervention that we're providing doesn't help, right? Is it a failure? No, it's actually another piece of data that's going to be important for us to be able to say, okay, now it's time for us to change course. Which is why it's so important for you to have a little bit of patience with yourself and the provider that you're working with. Granted that it is important to know when you should be moving on to a different provider, or when you should be asking more questions or gauging how long things should be taking. Now, for me as a physical therapist, when I'm working with people online, I often say, being that you're in current active state of pain, if we find the right specific activities or positions and we can affect it pretty quickly, your improvements will also be made pretty quickly as well. With the caveat, we need to make changes to how you go about doing things. And so there's always things to look at specifically on my end. Dr. V, for you, when it comes to the pain journey, how much leeway or how much time do you recommend people go experience with their providers, or even just try to figure out their pain journey? How much time is enough to help them say, am I putting enough effort or time into this? When should I actually be changing, looking for a different approach?
Right. Leaning into what you talked about. I mean, Thomas Edison's a great example of this, right? You know, people talked about, well, that didn't work. And he says, no, I just figured out another way not to make the light bulb, right? You know, or Kentucky Fried Chicken. He went to 1,000 different places before he finally sold his recipe and you know, made a killing. So, I mean, these are not failures. When, you know, when treatment didn't work, it's not a failure. It's like, okay, that's not the cause, or that wasn't what was going on. Part of what really gives me the confidence to 100% say these are the mechanisms of the 7 patterns: the stomach, you know, gallbladder, pituitary, thyroid, colon, hormones, stress, is because those headaches never leave my office. I mean, as crazy as that is, and the literally tens of thousands of patients that have been through my office, and you know, they've been doing it over 30 years now, those headaches don't leave the office. So that tells me, yes, what we're doing, those are, you know, treating that organ, treating that system is what the trigger is. But then, you know, chances are it could come back, you know, and so part of that prescription, part of what I'm trying to get to is ultimately also a call to action. You know, hey, now so you understand, if you eat food X, this is the symptom. You know, so should I never eat, you know, corn again? Well, eat it when you want to feel like doo-doo. When you want to have low back pain, know the consequence. My job, doctor, translates to teacher, right? So I want to teach you as a consumer what you're doing. And so it often will come down to having to keep an eye on how these things manifest. So again, when things ebb and flow, that gives us a window into, hey, it's flowing, it's worse. You know, what is different? There's some lifestyle trigger that we're doing, whether it's the way we're moving, our bike fit, the way we're striding when we run, you know, the way you're sitting at your desk, or, you know, the food that you're eating. It's, oops, I ate corn, I ate ice cream, I ate, you know, whatever the trigger is, that is going to play in. There's lists. I mean, we talked about the blood type diet on another podcast, but I mean, that's a lot of what confirmed it for me. I'd try to still splurge and eat a tomato or avocado, and I realized that I'd have symptoms of hypoglycemia or immune crash when I ate these foods. It's like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. So that provided me a list of where to look for the potential food triggers when I had these symptoms. So the information's out there. I mean, you're in the tech industry, your wife's in the tech industry. You know, I mean, the information's all over the place. It's just trying to sift through and find the right information. But ultimately, it comes down to listening to our bodies, because they're trying to tell us something.
100%. And you know, I will say what's interesting. So I'm going to be turning 37 years old this year, and I grew up a competitive athlete. I ate a lot of food. I swam in college, so I was eating, we'll say, 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, and it was great. When I retired from swimming, I gained 30 pounds within 2 months upon retiring, because I was eating
2 months.
2 months. Yeah, it was I mean, granted that, let's just say peak swim season, I was the leanest, right? But then I went from the leanest to the heaviest that I was in my life. And what was really interesting was the fact that I was still eating like I was an athlete. And so from there, I had changed up all my eating. And over the past 15 years post graduation, I've identified a lot of things that will actually make me feel better. And what's interesting is that I'll have conversations with people being like, oh, I can't be around Oreo cookies because I can't stop eating them. And then one of the questions I would often ask, I would say, well, how do you feel physically after you eat those Oreos? And they say, well, I feel terrible. What was really interesting is that they were in this perpetual cycle of like this immediate gratitude because it tastes good, but then also overriding the fact that they knew that the food was making them sick or making them not feel great. And it got to me thinking, because it was something that developed over the past couple of years where, yes, being even more in tune with my body. And even as an athlete, like, you had to be more in tune with your body so you can perform to the best of your ability. But us as human beings, we have the capacity to actually override our feelings so we can push human performance, so we can innovate, so we can do all these different things. And on sometimes it's to our detriment, right? Our bodies are beaten down and broken. Our bodies are filled with things that we shouldn't be putting on our bodies when it comes to food. And it got me thinking about, like, here I live in Northern California, you live in Southern California. We live one of the best areas when it comes to organic food. And I just think about how good I feel when I'm eating the food that I'm eating now compared to the foods that I was eating when I was younger. And I was thinking, well, I feel amazing right now. Does that mean I was feeling terrible and just overriding those signals when I was younger? And most likely, right? And so this is a perfect opportunity for us to really tune in and to listen to our bodies. And I think a lot of us healthcare professionals say listen to your body, but I don't think it pulls enough weight to people because folks really do bypass those signals. And so when it comes to listening to your body, listeners, my suggestion, and I'll have Dr. V piggyback off of this, is that you really have to take a moment and listen and ask yourself, how do you feel? How are your energy levels? How are your pain? How's your pain? When you eat these foods, or when you put these things in your body, or when you sleep less, or when you do these various different things, take a moment and ask, how is your reaction to it? Just take a pause. And that will actually provide you significant information to determine what your next move is in regards to your health, whether it be pain relief, whether it be managing these physiological dysfunctions. And it's going to give you a huge leg up in your recovery. Taking a moment to just figure out when can you make yourself feel better. And all this information is very useful because it helps us detect patterns so we can identify the necessary tools that will make us feel better. And so, Dr. V, what are some of your words of wisdom from a listen to your body standpoint?
Yeah, thank you for that, Ashley. Again, pain is intended to elicit change, right, or to motivate change. And so, I mean, I just celebrated a birthday. There was a big old cake and, bundt cakes and things like that. That stuff doesn't interest me at all, because I don't, my friends say, don't you cheat or splurge when you go on vacation? I like to feel good on vacation too, right? So understanding the consequence of eating those foods really should motivate people, to you, the listener, to hopefully inspire you to not enjoy those foods anymore. Again, I keep leaning on sugar just because it's an easy target. But, for me, I'm a B blood type. If I eat chicken, if I would have eaten chicken, I'd fall asleep almost like I'd ate sugar. And so chicken it's almost disgusting to me. But 84% of most of the population does fine on chicken. So, learn what those triggers are. If you're a B blood type, eating beef is going to set up low back pain. It's going to set up mono. So that good steak, that big steak doesn't look so attractive when you realize I'm going to be a sloth. They're going to have no energy if you eat that. Then it doesn't look so attractive anymore. And hopefully that understanding will help people make better choices so that they can thrive and they can go into those golden years without the aches and pains. Those aches and pains do not need to be there. They're there for a reason, to tell us to make change. And if you keep ignoring it, then you end up with arthritis and disabled and that sort of stuff. Learn it. The faster you learn, the faster you can get better, the less significant the consequences are.
And it's not just because we're getting old. So on that note, Dr. V, this has been really, really eye-opening. It allowed us to take a deeper dive into the other realm of, we'll even call it like the physical medicine and pain management world. Mm-hmm. For the listeners out there who want to learn a little bit more about you, I know that you were also talking about a book as well. What's the best way to get access to this information and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the book is called The Headache Advantage. My website is headacheadvantage.com. The book is on Amazon. The book is about headaches, again, because that helps us know where to target our energies. But the book is really ultimately about healthy living when it comes down to it. So as you read about the 7 different patterns, if you simply, and I embrace and support you if you do want to feel and function better. It's going to give you pearls and ways to optimize your digestion and your hormone health and that sort of stuff. So that's the Headache Advantage, available on Amazon or my website. My website is drvrzal.com, D-R-E as in Victor, R-Z-A-L.com. We've got 3 other docs that do similar work. They can help you solve those and get to, figure out your journal and your journey faster and better. And then I'm on social media posting pearls and shorts from things like this at Dr. Vrzal on Instagram and Facebook and so on.
Fantastic. Listeners, I'm going to go ahead and put that info into the show notes. Dr. Vrzal, it was great meeting you and really eye-opening. I'm excited for some future episodes talking specifically about sciatic itself. So listeners, look forward to that.
Let's dive in.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you got some help from today's podcast. And for more info, check us out at ifixyoursciatica.com. Have a fantastic and pain-free day. No patient-therapist relationship is formed by listening to this podcast. We are not providing medical advice, and all information should be confirmed by a medical provider.